Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Toraso Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. All right. So we are toward the end of chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. So we're moving there. The book of Ruth is not a long book. It has in totality 4 chapters. It's a short book. And honestly, even though it might seem to like giving you every commentary, I'm really not. There's really far more that I skipped and that I give over. So at this point, we understand a lot. We have learned a lot in this very interesting journey in the book of Ruth. We understood a lot of dynamics. We know the basic storyline, of course, how Elimelech, this very wealthy, noble family of Judah, of Yehuda, from the Bethlehem, illustrious city, illustrious tribe, the wealthiest man with the noblest lineage, and he abandoned ship by the famine, which we know lasted 10 years because the people were relying on his support for 10 years. And God said, he's not supporting you, got to turn to God. And Elimelech, God gave him several warnings. His livestock died. He lost his possessions. He didn't repent, and he died. And then his sons followed suit, and they did even worse because they married these 2 Moabite princesses, Ruth and Orpah, who we said we're following the opinion. There are varying opinions, but the opinion that makes the most sense, to my mind, is that they were converted, but they still perhaps thought their marriage was illegitimate because perhaps they thought, like most Jews thought, they're not allowed to marry a Moabite convert, including a woman. But they were married. If you were allowed to or weren't allowed to, which shows that they had tremendously fallen. And they married these princesses, which shows they had tremendously fallen, because by marrying these princesses, they were basically stuck in the land of Moab, because you can't divorce these women. The king will get mad at you, and you can't take them away from their father, the king. The king get mad at you. So they basically were consigning themselves to a lifetime in Moab, which again shows that something was very off with them, that they would want to do that. But they did it, and they were married for 10 years. And they lost all their livestock, and they didn't repent. And they lost all their possessions, and they didn't repent, and they both died. At this point, Naomi, who has lost her husband, who has lost her sons, who has lost all money that they had, has no reason to stay in Moab, and she hears from the perhaps Jewish, perhaps Moabite peddlers that the famine is over in the land of Judah, which she took it as a sign that God forgave the people, that the people were now better, so she wouldn't be scared to come back to people that were sinful, and that God forgave them, and God too could forgive her. And again, she wasn't really blamed for leaving Israel because she just was following her husband and staying with her sons. But she still felt obviously she had done something wrong because look how much she suffered. Lost her husband, lost her sons, lost all of her possessions. So she's going to walk back home on foot, literally barefoot. She had nothing. She was completely destitute. And these 2 Moabite princesses were saying, we're coming with. And she's like, are you crazy? What are you coming with for? And she 3 times tries to dissuade them, which is what you're supposed to do to dissuade the convert. Even though you could say, well, what convert? They already converted 10 years before. I mean, did they or didn't they? You say, yes, they did convert 10 years before. But she didn't know if it was a real legitimate conversion, because maybe they just converted to get married to her sons, which means for 10 years they weren't Jewish, or maybe it was for real, and for 10 years they were. So we'll see now. So the first time she tries to push them away, they both stuck with her, even though they were giving up a life of wealth, giving up a life as princesses. She said, go back to your mothers, go back to the palace, get married, have kids. They stuck with her. Second time, they stuck with her. Third time, Orpah leaves, which shows that she was never Jewish in the first place. And Ruth says, wherever you go, I'm going. I know you have nothing. I know it's a life of poverty. I perhaps know that maybe no man will marry me because maybe you can't marry a Moabite convert, but I'm still coming with. Which showed her absolute sincerity, not just now, but also 10 years prior, which legitimized the marriage. And they went walking by foot back to the land of Israel, which again, Naomi has been away from for 10 years, and obviously Ruth has never been to. So that is exactly where we're up to. We are up to verse 19. We're in chapter 1, verse 19. So in the previous verse, Naomi stops arguing with her, the verse says, because that was it. She saw Ruth is sincere. And once you have tested the potential convert 3 times, and 3 times they keep sticking with you despite everything you're telling them, then we don't test them anymore. Then we don't reject them, and then we do whatever we can and we treat them, lovingly. Now, of course, here Ruth didn't have to now go to a conversion. She had converted 10 years prior, but now we know that her conversion of 10 years prior was valid. So here she is. She's walking with her mother-in-law. They're both destitute. We said they're walking on the bare ground. They've got no shoes, completely destitute, and not know what type of reception they would have when they get to Israel. Naomi abandoned the people. Maybe they're all going to make fun of her. She lost everything, her husband, her children, her wealth. She's coming back as this pauper. And she's coming back with a Moabite daughter-in-law. Okay, she converted, but maybe they would reject her also. She's a Moabite, and maybe they would think it's wrong. Maybe they would think that a Moabite can't marry a Jew. So neither of them knew what type of reception they would get, but they were walking toward God. That's where they were going. We're up to verse 19, and the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. So we said Bethlehem was at that time the main city in the tribe of Judah. It was the main city. It was the most significant city. And this was Naomi's city. This is the city she was from. So obviously everyone there knew her. Everyone there knew her as the most important woman in town, the richest woman in town. She was also a very good woman, a very kind woman. We said her name Naomi is like Na'amah, pleasant. So she was very, very important. And now she's coming back as a pauper with nothing. So it's interesting if you look at the verse, and the two of them went on, where we see here how God is like putting Naomi and Ruth in the same category, which shows us how precious the convert is to God, that once she had proven her commitment to her conversion of 10 years prior, which means she really was a true convert, God is ranking her and Naomi equally, even though Naomi comes from a very illustrious lineage and Naomi was very, very, very righteous. But the convert, the true convert, is that precious to God. So the two of them are viewed like in the same breath, at the same level. And also, it's when it says the two of them went together, it's showing how strong Ruth was, because the two of them are going with the same mindset. Now here's Naomi. She probably had some trepidations, but she was in essence going home. So of course, as I'm saying, what's going to be her welcome? Where is she going to? What's going to be? She didn't know. But she was in essence going back to her birthland. Ruth was going to, she really didn't know what it was going to be. How would the people treat her? She's a Moabite. Moabim were the enemies of the Jewish people. Her people had, so to speak, taken Elimelech and the two sons, and I mean, you want to blame it on the Moabites, which people might. She's going to a place where she didn't know the land, she didn't know what reception she would get, and yet she walked the same way Naomi did, which really shows Ruth's commitment and strength and determination that this land is my land. The same way it's Naomi's land, it's my land. I've never been there, it's my land. I don't know anyone there, it's my land. I have no relatives, it's my land. This was Ruth. This shows exactly where Ruth was holding. And now they come, verse 20. Oh no, sorry, this is still the end of verse 19. Sorry, I didn't realize, didn't do the whole 19. And it came to pass, when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city was tumultuous over them. And the woman said, could this be Naomi? So they come, and everyone's like, what? Total shock. Again, Naomi left as this wealthy woman with servants, with a carriage, with all the accoutrements, and she's coming back literally without even shoes on her feet. Poor, looking like someone who suffered a lot. Could this be Naomi? So the whole city is there, and the whole city is talking about them. That sounds like a lot of fun, right? If any of you have ever been in a situation where you feel like everyone's talking about you for whatever reason, it's not very fun. Now, how did the whole city find out so fast? Look what the verse says. The whole city was tumultuous over them, like the verse isn't exaggerating. So somehow, like this, the whole city's talking about them. So the sages said, because the whole city, I don't know how many people were in the whole city, but the whole city was gathered anyway for a different reason. So the whole city's gathered. And then Naomi and Ruth come. So the whole city's like, whoa. And they all start focusing and thinking and talking. It says Naomi. She looks like Naomi, but she looks so old. She looks so poor. She looks like she's gone through so much. Could this be Naomi? So why was the whole city gathered? So some say it was the second day of Pesach, or the second day of Passover. Now, not nowadays, but in biblical times, in times when there was serving God through the tabernacle or the temple, there was a special ceremony that was done on the second day of Passover. Remember, in Israel, the second day of Passover is already not the holiday. It's already what's called Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days. The holiday day of the holiday is only one day. So the first day was the holiday of Passover. And the second day is a special ceremony of the reaping of the first growing barley. And this is very significant legally. If you've ever heard the term Chadash and Yashan, and this is the demarcation line of the old grain and the new grain. It's a very, very, very spiritually significant thing. So the whole city was gathered to watch this very important ritual ceremony that none of us have ever seen because we don't do it nowadays. But in the times of the temple, they did. So that's when the whole city was there. Another answer, and again, if they're not contradictory, they both could be true, is that the Boaz, who was the most important person of the town and the most important person of the tribe, and really the most important person of the entire Jewish people, because Boaz is another name for Yitzan, who was the judge of the Jewish people. His wife died that day. So the entire city came out to pay respects by her funeral. Now, of course, this is very significant in our storyline, because remember, Boaz is now going to be the one to marry Ruth in a while. Now, of course, in those days, you could have more than one wife. So having been married to one wouldn't impede marrying another, but still, it even more sets the scene for what's going to be. So we have one interpretation, one understanding of our sages, is this was the second day of Passover, and everyone's gathered to watch this religious ceremony. And at the same time, Boaz, the most important man in the city, and the tribe, and the Jewish people, his wife passed away. So the whole city came out for the funeral. Someone had a question? So even though, again, technically Boaz could have had two wives, but the Midrash looks at it like one wife was taken, and as that wife was taken, God brings another wife onto the scene. God's taking away one, but he's giving him another one. So not in terms of like, well, she had to die for us to get married to him, but rather in the sense of like God takes and God gives, which of course is a generic lesson that we see in many other places as well. This idea that sometimes God takes from us, and as he takes, he's going to give. We don't always see it so clearly. Obviously here Boaz did not see it so clearly for a while. And often in our life, we don't see it so clearly that as he's taking, he's giving. But it's a true way that we should always look at how God acts. And sometimes we feel, oh, that was harsh. That was taking something. We should know God takes, God gives. I don't know if anyone's had that experience in their life, that they could think of a time when they felt like God took, but then God gave. It happens sometimes. Again, sometimes it happens.
God took everything from me as far as chomriyut go, money. But then he gave me the Rebbe a few months later. So
Really?
Baruch Hashem. I would not trade what I lost, which was like $320,000, in order to discover my roots. So Baruch Hashem.
And did you feel that maybe you had to lose that to be open to finding what you found? Did that help you on your journey because you lost, you were open to the find?
It started my journey. Absolutely. I mean, yes, I moved to another city and I found Chabad, and wow, I felt at home.
So interesting. Wow, that's so powerful. Yeah. So if you're following what Rachel's saying, Rachel said that she lost her financial resources, and not only that God took and God gave, but by taking that opened her up to what God was giving her, which was her Judaism, her heritage, her connection to God, so that, and connection to the Rebbe. So that was like the process of taking was part of the process of giving.
Yeah, I also want to share that when we were becoming observant, some friends got kind of not they left us, but they figured it's not their journey. It's not for them, which I don't. And at some point, it felt very lonely. It was only us, But then we got the best friend. Like over the years, we acquired people. I mean, like acquired friends that we would never met and knew if we didn't choose this path. So we're always so grateful. At that time, we know that by losing, certain friends, we grieved, like the friends that we knew, and we thought we're gonna be by ourselves, but then Hashem was sending and just like friendship of
So beautiful.
people. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's more like really like we're saying here, that when you lost something, and you lost something because of choices you made, but God was like, give me time, give me time. I'm going to make up for the loss. Trust me, trust me. And at this point, you don't feel any lack. You feel wealthy in this area.
Absolutely. It was much
More than the
more
loss.
than loss. Exactly.
The gain was much more than the loss. That's very beautiful. How long did it take till you felt that? Do you remember? 5 years, 10 years?
You know what? It was pretty fast when we decided to keep kosher, and we have had no one who kept kosher. It was lonely. And then within few months, I met a woman on a playground who was with her kids, and she kept kosher. We became like all of a sudden. I mean, I haven't met her when we didn't keep kosher. So they were first couple that became our eventually very close friends. But it was amazing. It's
Wow.
at that time when we really needed someone who kept kosher just to be able to to relate. And here on playground we
You met her because you needed to meet her. That's
only looking
beautiful.
back we realize how many
Right, right. A lot of times when you're going through it, you don't realize. But
exactly.
wow, that's also very beautiful to see how quickly God tried to heal that hurt and try to compensate for that loss. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad Rachel and Hannah shared, because a lot of times we're going through things, but we don't see it. First of all, we don't see it clearly. And so we don't ever realize, wait, God actually took care of that. Like it hurt and now it doesn't hurt anymore, but we sort of forget why because we move on to the next issue. And also it's just reassuring to know, even if we are in the process, even if we're in the road and we're just experiencing the loss, that God takes and God gives. That's really beautiful. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Hannah, for sharing that. Anyone else want to share along those lines? It's very strengthening to hear. It's strengthening to see that people have these experiences and can point a finger at them. Because a lot of us have these experiences, but sometimes it's not as clear in our heads that we can articulate it. Well, thank you both, because that was very powerful. So they said, so the sages are saying, the Midrash says, God took Boaz's wife and God had someone else waiting right here for him. Again, not that he needed to lose his wife to marry Ruth, but like God took, don't worry. God has something else in store. And again, here they come. All the townspeople are gathered for the reaping of the barley for Boaz's wife. And then they look and they're like, oh my gosh, is that Naomi? Could that be? She looks so different. What happened to her? What happened to her? What happened to her? So everyone's talking about her. That's a great feeling. So how did she respond? So she, of course, heard the yaps. And she said, don't call me Naomi. Naomi, we said, is like Na'amah, pleasant one. Don't call me Naomi. She replied, call me Mara. Mara means like the embittered one. For God has dealt very bitterly with me. I've suffered a lot. I've suffered. I don't feel like Na'amah. I don't feel like a Naomi anymore. Right now, I feel like a Mara. I feel very bitter. I was full. So why'd she suffer so much? She says, I was full when I went away, but God has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi? God has testified against me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, again, I want to just restate what I said before. Naomi was a very, very righteous woman. When we listen to these words, it might sound like she's not so righteous, because she might sound like, oh, wow, she's really angry at God. She's really mad. She's really resentful. She was in a lot of pain. She suffered a lot. She lost her husband. She lost her sons. She lost everything. But she wasn't angry at God. She wasn't denying him. She wasn't rebelling against him. She felt very like I guess I never deserved to be a Naomi. In the beginning, what did I know? I thought I was good, I guess. Everyone's telling me I'm so great. And God showered me with such a great life. I have a great husband. I have children. I have wealth. I've got friends. I've got a wonderful life. And now everything was taken away, and maybe I never deserved any of it in the first place. Because obviously God is just. And if God gave me such blows, I deserve it. So that's what she was feeling. She said, when I went away, I was full. I had children. According to one interpretation, she was pregnant when she left. She obviously lost the child and never had it. She was full with wealth, full with children. And I came back empty. I'm widowed. I'm childless. I'm poverty-stricken. So what do you call me Naomi for? Naomi sounds like a person with good fortune. Not only do I not have good fortune, if this is how God treated me, I probably never deserved the good fortune I had. Again, she wasn't denying God. She wasn't pouring anger at God. She was really expressing her pain and saying, I guess I was never such a good person in the first place, even though for a while I had it good. But if this is what I deserve now, I guess that's really what I always deserved. I was really always a Mara. I just somehow thought I was a Naomi. And so it was, this is the last verse in this chapter. And so it was that Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law. So again, her daughter-in-law is the verse testifying that the marriage was legitimate. Because if Ruth's marriage to Machlon had been illegitimate, she would never have been a daughter-in-law in Torah's words, and she would never have been called a daughter-in-law or mother-in-law, which again reaffirms that no, the conversion was real. It was a kosher marriage. Who returned from the fields of Moab. They came to Beis Lechem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Remember, we said that this day, the second day of Passover, begins the harvest, and now they're going to continue. This is the time of the harvesting of the barley. Now, why we emphasizing she's a Moabite, like that seems to be not so nice. Once someone converts, they're Jewish. They're a Jew. We say, oh, he's a Jew from India, he's a Jew from China, he's a Jew from Japan, he's a Jew from Mexico, he's a Jew from Kansas, he's a Jew. Why is the verse that should, of course, be very nice and expressive of God's will and wisdom, why is it emphasizing, oh, she's a Moabite? So there's lots of different ways to understand this, but one way that I thought was very beautiful is that it's very possible she's the first person from Moab that ever converted. Why? You say, oh, because they're all such wicked, horrible people. Maybe that too, but for another reason. Because they knew that a Moabite convert was not allowed to marry a Jew. That's what's written in the Torah. Lo sabo Ammoni u'Moavi b'kal Hashem. That a convert from Moab or Ammon is not allowed to marry a Jew. They could convert. Judaism is an open club, not a closed club. Anyone can convert. Black, red, yellow, no problem. Anyone can convert. But not everyone can marry a Jew. So what's supposed to happen? They're supposed to be, single their whole life? No. We're told they can marry another convert. But they can't marry a Jew. Now, that's already very much limiting your playing field, especially in those days where there weren't too many converts. Nowadays, of course, as we're almost at the complete redemption, so there's a lot of converts, relatively speaking, because any spark that's supposed to convert has to do it already now, because once Mashiach comes, then no more can anyone convert. Conversion is only allowed until the complete revelation of Mashiach. Once Mashiach is completely revealed, no one can convert. Because then, of course, everybody would want to, and it wouldn't have that same depth of sincerity. So at this time, to say, well, you could always marry another convert, well, who knows how to find another convert? And who knows he's not going to be 30 years older than me or 30 years younger than me? Or so if we're telling a convert, you can convert, but you can't marry a native Jew, it's almost like telling them you can't marry someone. So possibly for this reason, or possibly just because there was no such godly person until this time, there were never any converts from Moab. Here Ruth converted knowing that maybe she really wasn't supposed to marry Machlon. She was converted, she was Jewish, but maybe he wasn't allowed to marry her. And even if he sort of decided he was allowed to, who says any other man's going to do that for her? So her conversion was so special because she honestly thought, maybe I'll never marry again. But she was still willing to do it for God. And this is like such a sacrifice. And we as women can, of course, appreciate this sacrifice. She wasn't like, 15 years old at the time. According to most of the sages, at this point, she was 40. But still, she had the rest of her life ahead of her. And no children. And maybe she'd never get married again. But she still did because she chose God. And that's why the verse emphasizes she was the Moabite convert to really sing her praise. It was so unusual, so special. Nobody's a convert from Moab. Who would get into this situation? And yet Ruth did, because she so much wanted to be part of God's people, which is really very, very, very special. Okay, with that, we finished chapter 1. And the last thing they told us was a bit of chronology, right? They're at Beis Lechem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, why is this significant? Well, actually, it's very significant to the storyline. First of all, it's significant because it's already the harvest season. Let's understand something. We keep saying Naomi is penniless. Elimelech lost everything. Machlon and Chilion lost everything. They literally, if you remember, didn't even have shoes for their feet. But every Jew has ancestral land. Now, Elimelech, Machlon and Chilion would have been Elimelech's. Elimelech never sold his land. When he left Israel, he was a very, very wealthy man. He didn't sell his land. The whole time he was in Moab, his land was in Israel. What did he need it for? I mean, he's very, very wealthy. He also happens to have lots of fields, like whatever, some extra real estate. Now, when Naomi came back, she had nothing. Her husband lost everything. Her sons lost everything, but they still had their land. Their land still existed. So seemingly, okay, they have the land. With the land, they can do something. But the problem is, the verse says, it's already the harvest time. They have the land, but they'll still go hungry because they can't plant anything at this point. It's the time when you harvest what you planted. So they still needed to find a way to support themselves. It's also important in the storyline, as we're going to see what happens in chapter 2. So moving right along to chapter 2. Naomi had a relative through her husband, a man of substance from the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, obviously, Naomi had many relatives. As we said a while ago, probably she was related to everyone in Beis Lechem, right? Meaning this is one tribe, Judah. This is one city within it, and probably everyone was intermarried with each other. So why is the verse saying like she has like one relative? Because he was a very, very important person. As we said, Boaz was he was a close relative. He was, according to most commentators, he was her husband's brother's son. He was Naomi's nephew. And he was the judge of the whole Israel. And he was very wealthy and very respected and very godly person. So this means this is a very important relative. Now this shows us something very interesting about Naomi. Here's Naomi. And you might think she was wrong in this. I don't know, wrong or right. We could discuss that. Here's Naomi. She has nothing. She can't even plant because the planting season's over. She literally doesn't have, this is not a socialist country or a welfare state. She has no food to put in her mouth. And she has a very wealthy relative who's a relatively close relative. It's her nephew, her husband's nephew. He had lots of means of support. And she didn't turn to him. She didn't want to ask him for anything. They had nothing. No way to buy any food. They had no money at all. They had nothing, and she did not want to ask him for any support. Do you think that makes sense? Was that a right move or a wrong move? Like in such a situation, would it be appropriate for her to ask for support? Because was she supposed to starve, or her daughter was supposed to starve? Or is it right because you shouldn't take food from other people? Any thoughts on this?
It's a very difficult question because we live in a So there is a lot of social programs, and we always said that social programs, we have to take care of the poor and all that. So like to me, my natural answer would be, sure, she should ask him to help her, and he would be happy to help her. That's my like natural thinking from. But on the other hand, she was, I guess, she had like a certain status, and maybe from that status that she had before, she was very proud person, and she couldn't go and ask for food. Maybe that was difficult personally for her. So I don't think it's simple. I think it's a complicated issue.
It is a complicated issue, and I think you summarized a lot of the points well. Anyone else have feelings on that one? In such a situation, are you supposed to ask, or are you supposed to not ask?
For a giver, I think it's difficult to ask because they only know how to give.
That's what Chava was saying, in a sense, right?
So
you're saying if you're used to asking, you ask, and you understand that this is God's way of giving. So if God wants, the person's going to give you. You're giving God an opportunity to give you. But if you're not used to asking, if you're used to only giving, it's hard to put yourself in that situation.
Exactly.
That's true. That's true. Any other thoughts on this one? Fega, were you going to contribute? Suddenly you're big on my screen.
Yeah, I would definitely. I mean, it's not just about her, you know. She should have asked, I would say, because she had people, you know, depending on her.
Because she has Rus, who has nobody to ask.
Yeah, yeah. So she absolutely have to, you know. I know it's hard, but in some it is very hard. But in some situation, probably need to ask for help, regardless.
Especially if someone's relying on you.
Yeah.
Now, again, Rus did not come to be a burden on her mother-in-law. And of course, initially, Rus could have gone back to the palace, whatever palaces looked like in those days. I mean, her father was the king. That's indisputable. And definitely there would have been food there for her. So Rus wasn't going to burden her mother-in-law. Rus was going, in a sense, to help her mother-in-law. But yes, practically speaking, you know, I mean, there was the two of them, and Naomi had some connections, and Rus obviously didn't know a soul. So there is this sense of Naomi wanting to take care of Rus. So we're going to see, of course, what happens is that Rus instead takes care of Naomi. But of course, because Naomi didn't ask, so then Rus makes her decision, which is sort of, we see how it moves the plot along, but we see what choice she made. So yeah, there are a lot of different things. Like there is the concept in Judaism of not asking. It says King Solomon said, one who hates presents shall live. So there's definitely the concept of not asking for yourself, for sure. Obviously, if you're asking for someone else or for a cause, that's not the same thing. But personally, on the other hand, you know, there's Jewish people are by definition generous and charitable, and this was a relative, and she really had nothing. So it's interesting when one of the commentators says something nobody here's touched on.
Rachel has something to say. Maybe she will.
Oh, Rachel, sorry. Rachel, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chava.
I just thought that maybe first she should try by herself. And if there is no way to do it by herself, then
So what could she have done by herself?
She found something to do, right?
Ruth found something to do.
Yeah.
But you're right. What you're saying is you're sort of combining both approaches, and everyone's sort of understanding that it was very difficult for Naomi to ask for all the reasons everyone said. I agree. And yet, as Fega said, there was a need. And as Chava said, this is not a socialist state. This is not a welfare state. There's no other way to get the food. She needs to get this food. Nobody's, you know, like, how are we supposed to eat? I'm not talking about luxury, I'm talking about food. So Rachel's saying maybe she should have trusted in God and tried to, in some way,
To work.
work, or maybe try to sell the land that she had. Why didn't she try to do that? We're going to discuss soon the land and how that plays into everything. Did she have the right to the land? Could she have sold the land? Of course, nobody wants to sell ancestral land, but also nobody wants to die of starvation. And then should she Rachel saying combining both approaches, which try your own, but if not, in the end of the day, you have to have food. So one of the commentators say is that for two reasons she did not go to Boaz. Meaning, yes, in a sense, she should have, because they needed food, because they couldn't starve, because she had to take care of Rus. It's not comfortable, and she should have done it. But there were reasons why she didn't do it. Obviously, she thought about it and she rejected the idea. And one reason she rejected the idea was she was embarrassed. Not only embarrassed, as people said, because she's used to being the giver and the woman that supports others, and here she's asking for support, but specifically embarrassed because obviously it was her husband's choice, but with her husband, she left Israel and left all the starving Jews to protect their own money. Again, we don't blame Naomi at all. It wasn't her choice at all. It wasn't what she would have done if she was making the decision. But she followed her husband, who left all the starving Jews. Now, who did support them? We're told Boaz did. In other words, Elimelech was the wealthiest man in the city, the wealthiest man of his tribe. He left his land. It wasn't land to do anyone. It's a famine. There's nothing growing. He took his money with him. Who was now the wealthiest person that everyone turned to for support? Boaz. So she was embarrassed. We left with our money. In the meanwhile, we abandoned ship and you stayed on the ship and you supported everyone. And now I'm coming to you for money. It's it just felt so off and wrong. You did the right thing. We did the wrong thing. And then that was one reasoning for why she didn't go to him. Another reasoning was she felt that Boaz did not approve of this Moabite girl that her son had married. And this was something she had in her mind. If you remember, I mentioned it in the dialogue between her and Rus and Orpah when she was dissuading them. So there are many explanations on why she was telling them not to come. On the most simple level, truly, what are you coming for? I don't have a husband to produce a child. You're not going to wait till he's old. I have no kids for you. Go back, get married, be happy, have kids, have a life. We said, really, there was this test, in a sense, the sincerity of their conversion. And there's also this sense of, however hard it's going to be for her to be accepted back into the fold, how are people going to react with this Moabite that she's saying was converted, that she's saying is a sincere convert? Again, it was a Moabite. It was somebody that had never, that tribe, that country of people had never produced a convert. The Torah is saying, don't marry them, and her son did. So she felt that Boaz, not that he was upset that she came back, but he wasn't very happy that she brought along a Moabite convert. And according to some, she was right. Not everyone holds that way, but according to some, she was right. And until Boaz saw her personally and observed her piety, he was very dubious about this daughter-in-law that his, let's call it cousin or aunt, truly. Rus is the cousin. Machlon was his cousin. Rus is the aunt. Naomi was the aunt brought back. So that's another reason why she didn't. And then others say no, she just felt, no, I'm not turning to man. I'm going to rely on God. And even though I have no food, and Rus has no food, and Rus has no connections, and I do have his connection, and he's very wealthy, and of course he would be very happy to give me food if I asked him. I have no question on that. He can afford it. It's a mitzvah, and we're related. Of course he would do it for me, no question, blink of an eye. But I'm not going to do it. God, I trust you, and you're going to support me. And we see this among many, many righteous people. Among many righteous people, we see this attitude. The attitude being, I'm not taking from man. If God wants, God will find a way to give me. But I'm not going to go asking for my own needs. I could ask for other people's needs, but for my own needs, I'm not asking. We see many people that really suffered a lot of deprivation, but they wouldn't ask because they really felt that God will support us and I'm not asking. I'm trusting God, and whatever I'm supposed to get, God will give me. I'm not turning to man, because turning to man is almost like saying, I need man to support me. I don't need man to support me. I need God to support me. Now
So
again,
is that why we say,
debatable point. What, Rachel?
is that why we say in ברכת המזון, רק מידך הקדושה הרחבה, הפתוחה הקדושה הרחבה? It's like
Exactly.
yeah.
That's exactly what we say. What Rachel's referring to is the after blessing, after we eat, especially after bread. There's actually someone, a friend of mine, who was, her business wasn't doing too well. And she took upon herself, when she says the blessing after bread, to concentrate on the meaning of the words and to really say it with intention. And she saw an incredible increase in her business. It was really very, very powerful. Yes, that is what we're saying. Now, again, I am in no way denigrating anyone that asks someone else for money for their needs. I'm not saying that at all. And of course, we very much believe in helping other people. So from the end, to be the helper, to be the giver is of course very good. But there is this virtue in relying on God and not turning to man. That is a virtue. Again, that does not mean that it's wrong to. I'm trying to say this very carefully. It doesn't mean it's wrong to, but it means it's virtuous not to. So Naomi and Ruth here could have asked Boaz, did not have to do what Ruth ended up doing, but chose not to because they wanted to rely on God. Of course, the question could be, well, what happened to Boaz? In other words, we understand that Naomi was embarrassed to turn to him. That makes sense to us. We even understand that Naomi sort of felt, I'm going to go to Boaz. He's going to look at me with a bad eye. I brought back this Moabite, give him all these problems. And we, of course, understand her and Ruth deciding to go to the higher level of not turning to man. But why didn't Boaz think? I mean, the whole town knew she came back, right? The whole town was talking about her and her impoverished state. So where was Boaz? Why didn't he send a servant with a basket full of bread to her, to wherever she's parking herself? What we understand from her end, but what happened from his end? Why didn't he just generously think? I mean, he could afford it. He could. And it's a relative. And they're in dire straits. So Naomi is right that it's a virtue on her part not to ask. But seemingly he should have offered. So some say that again, remembering his wife just passed away. And he was in the mourning for his wife. So he just, if it had been a normal time, he would have done it. You know, his wife passed away, burying her, sitting Shiva for her. So he, you know, at that point, you're not focused on what's happening outside the Shiva circle and who came to town and what you're supposed to do to be hospitable to them. But normally, of course, he would have, because he was a very good person and a very generous person and a wealthy person. And obviously, these people really needed food. And that's sort of understanding why he didn't do it. But then people say, okay, but then why didn't he, once he got up from his mourning, like we see what's going to happen, at this point, he's already not mourning anymore. Why didn't he at that point, again, what happened was Ruth said, listen, we got to have food. Now there are laws in Torah that the poor can go and collect certain things from the field, which is not asking people. It's a law, you know, if certain sheaves are abandoned or fell out, then the poor can go and collect them. It's a sort of very demeaning work for the former princess to be collecting the fallen sheaves, and from this they're going to make food for themselves. But that's what you decide to do. When, again, I'm not asking a person, I'm not taking from any person. Like all the other poor, this is my portion, this is what I'm allowed to take. And Ruth decided to do this because she didn't want Naomi, who was much older than her, to have to be doing this. And obviously even more embarrassing for Naomi, who is known by the people. I mean, she knew every beggar in town, but who was known by the people to be among the beggars collecting these fallen sheaves in the field. So some say that when, as we're going to see, Ruth is there and she's in Boaz's field and Boaz sees her and understands who she is, Some say Boaz at that point didn't just say, what are you, all day you're going to be working to collect a few sheaves? I can give you loaves of bread. Like, please, you're a relative. What are you doing this to yourself for? But Boaz maybe at that point, some say thought, she's choosing not to ask. Like, again, they could have come and asked me. I would have given them. They chose not to. They'd rather, so to speak, gather all day fallen sheaves instead of asking someone else. I'm not going to start giving. Let her do her own work. That's what she wants to do. Let her do it. Some say maybe he felt like, this is a single woman. I'm right now a single man. It's not appropriate for me to act in any way toward her. So I'm not going to give her, which means in essence, I don't give Naomi either. You know, there are various understandings among the commentators why Naomi and Ruth didn't ask. We can understand, but why didn't Boaz on his own give? Because again, if you were in that situation and suddenly a very, very, very poor relative comes to your area, seemingly, even if they don't ask you, you would do something to help them and they're your relative. And Boaz was a very righteous person. So why didn't he? So this is how our sages understand it, between the mourning and then she's choosing to work on her own and not wanting to do something inappropriate. So putting all three of these ideas together, he just did not send them anything, which means they survived by what Ruth gathered. So again, she's not begging, she's not turning to people for food, but she's gathering the food that the poor are allowed to take, as we're going to see what this means. Okay. So here they are. I gave you a little bit ahead of the story to explain sort of what happened and why Boaz didn't give. So they come and they have nothing. So Ruth the Moabite says to Naomi, let me go out to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose eyes I shall find favor. So Naomi responded, go ahead, my daughter, she said to her. So she went off. So again, Naomi knows she has this rich relative. And it's interesting that the verse emphasizes this point. Like, why did the verse tell it to us? But the verse wants to highlight the dynamics of what's going on here. First, they come to town, and everyone's talking about them. A Moabite, is that kosher? Is that not kosher? Well, maybe she's kosher at convert, but definitely wasn't kosher the marriage. Definitely not kosher the marriage. Definitely not kosher the marriage. What's Naomi doing with her? I don't know. Look what happened to Naomi. Who knows where she's holding in his life nowadays? And the verse has to tell us they have this very wealthy relative who they are not asking any help for, and they have nothing. And then Ruth, the until a little while ago princess, says to her mother-in-law, I don't want you to go. I mean, I'll go. We got to eat. This is what Torah says. This is how we're allowed to eat. So I'm going to go with the poor and I'm going to gather the fallen grains. And she learned all the laws. We're going to say Boaz was very impressed and saw that she was following all the laws very carefully to gather those grains because we have to have food. I'll come back. There'll be food. Not the best way to earn it, but we don't have any opportunities here to earn money and we need to eat. So that's what she did, which again is an incredible, Torah looks at it as an incredible testimony to Ruth's righteousness. Hey, come on, she was a princess. She didn't say, oh my gosh, for this I came to Judah. Bye, Naomi, I'm heading back to Eglon, my father, the king. Not only did she not say that, but she didn't put any pressure on her mother-in-law to find some easier way for them to get the money, like asking some rich relatives. She said, there's no food. I'll go take care of it. I don't want you to have to go, Naomi. I'll go take care of it. I don't want you to have to be embarrassed like that. I don't want you to have to do the physical work like that. I'll go take care of it. Which was an incredible, incredible thing because like I think Chava was touching on before, like a lot of asking or things have to do with your status, what hurts. You know, like it says, like in Egypt, one of the ways the Egyptians tortured the Jews was they had the men do women's work and the women do men's work. And the question is, okay, for the women to do men's work, we understand that's very difficult. But why was it torturing the men to do women's work? That should be easier. And the answer is physically it's easier, but mentally, psychologically, it's harder. It's just hard to do work that's not for you. So to be the princess, and now say you're going to be the pauper gathering the fallen sheaves, and she offered, and she did it. And she could have just said, listen, I don't know, Naomi. We're here. I'm hungry. I don't know the solution. It wasn't Naomi asked her. She didn't even ask Naomi to come with her. She said, I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. I'm not a princess. I'm a Jewish girl. This is what God says is a legitimate way. I'm doing it. Which again, really is a testimony to what a special person she was. Now it's interesting because in those days, there's basically 3 ways the poor were able to eat from the harvest. In Hebrew, we call them leket, shichacha, and peah. Peah means the Jewish farmer, the corners of the fields he was not allowed to harvest from, they were for the poor. Shichacha means if you forgot to take a bundle, you couldn't go back for it. That was for the poor. And leket means as the harvester is harvesting, if things fall from his hands, he's not allowed to pick them up. It's for the poor. Now, understanding those 3 ideas, leket, shichacha, and peah, the corners of the fields that you're not allowed to harvest, they're for the poor. If something fell from your hands, you're not allowed to harvest it. It's for the poor. And if you forgot a bundle, you can't go back and get it. It's for the poor. Logically speaking, which was the easiest of those 3 for the poor to get food from? From the corners, from the fallen, or from the forgotten?
From forgotten, because it's already, ready to be picked up.
Okay, so Hannah says forgotten. Anyone have any other votes in that? Either there's the corners of the fields that they're not allowed to harvest. There's the fallen, you pick it up, and as you're picking up a whole sheaf, a few fall. And there's forgotten, you made a bundle and you left it behind you. Oops, you can't go and get it.
I think from corners.
Why, Chava?
Because I think from corners, because corners exist for sure, but there is an element of chance that someone forgot or didn't forget, right? Or someone fall something or didn't fall. There is an element of chance, but the corners seems to be always there.
Exactly. And that was what happened. So we are going to go with Chava's thinking because that was the idea. I'll just review it in case people sometimes don't pay attention, most people giving ideas. If you have a field and there's a corner that you planted, but you are not allowed to harvest, it's only for the poor. So every poor person knows in that corner there's food. But the forgotten or the fallen, how do you know if anyone forgot or let something fall? So you basically have to just envision a whole field. You're scrounging among, after the harvesters went before you, and then you're like following them to see, did anything drop? Did anything drop? Oh, something dropped there. Okay, I got it. I got something. Did anything drop? Was there any bundle they made and forgot? Or did anything drop and I could get it? So it's much more, like you're saying, chancier. I mean, maybe something dropped, maybe something didn't drop. Who knows? The corner is avada. You have the whole corner. A corner doesn't mean a tiny little corner. This amount of land that they planted, and they're not allowed to harvest. It's all for you.
I misunderstood. I thought you meant physically. What's easier out of 3? You know what? Yeah, of course.
So it makes sense to everyone. So therefore, Ruth should have gone for the corners, which she didn't. She says clearly here, she's going for the sheaves that fell. And she did this specifically because most of the poor people went for the corners. Very logically. I mean, if you're poor and you're looking for food, go to the corner. That's where the food is. It happens, you're chancing among, you're going to go, oh, I saw something fell there, I got a sheave. Oh, something fell there, I got a sheave. Go to the corner, that's where the food is. But she didn't feel it was modest. Like she knew the corners were mobbed. It's like Walmart, She knew they were mobbed. All the poor people are all going to the corners, and it just felt like it'd be very, it could liably be a very immodest situation as everyone's scrounging around among the corners. All the poor people are bumping into each other and trying to grab the food, and this one got, there's all these laws. What if one poor person took, and the other person, and he took more, and he didn't have any, they're all poor, they all want, and this is the corner they're all grabbing from. She didn't want to be part of that scene. She didn't want to be grabbing. She didn't want to be in a place where people are grabbing. She didn't want too close for comfort, too many men around all grabbing. Who knows? She's right there. She's a woman. She said, you know what? I'm going to do something different. I'm going to gather from what fell, which nobody does unless there's nothing left in the corners, because it's much chancier. It's much less likely you're going to walk away after a whole day's work. How much are you going to have? If you work a whole day in a corner, as long as you could harvest, you're going to have food. If you're a whole day looking for fallen, how much are you going to walk away with? She said, I'd rather do it this way. I don't want to be among the grabbers or getting grabbed from. I don't want too close for comfort men. It doesn't feel modest. It doesn't feel appropriate. God wants to give me, the harvesters will drop. I'm going to go and just pick up what's dropped. So that's why she made, which again just shows the special type of person she was, because they really needed the food. And it was very degrading work for her, but still, I'd say maybe she retained her dignity of self to say she was going to do it like a princess. She wasn't going to go for the corner. She was going to go for where nobody else was going, just what fell. And it also says, it's interesting how she expressed it. She said, let me go out to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose eyes I shall find favor. Which is sort of interesting, because what do you mean in whose eyes I shall find favor? This is a law. You don't have to ask the owner for permission, not to take from the corners, not to take from what was fallen, not to take from what was forgotten. This is the law. If they're religious people, as they all were, you don't go asking them, you're allowed to take. But she was saying, no, I want to do it a little differently. I want to make sure the owner's good with me taking. And I don't want to be where the other people are. I want to be like after. I don't want to be embarrassed by the others. I don't want to be part of that group. I just want to do it separately. And so also people said she wanted to be separate. Again, part of her modesty, as we see many times here in these verses, things that attest to her modesty, that she didn't feel it was modest to be part of a group of people standing up and standing down, and that, she was, as we're going to say, very careful to stand up and to stand down in a very modest way. But she still just felt it wouldn't be modest to be doing it amid all these other, probably primarily men. So that's what she did. And so it's interesting, because when she did this, how do you feel for us at this moment? What's your, if you were her friend, her neighbor, hearing that she's going to do this, how would you feel? What are your feelings for her right now as she's going to gather what the harvesters dropped?
Sad, painful, like.
Yeah, you feel a lot of compassion. Look how the princess has fallen. Look how this woman, she's a convert. We're supposed to love the converts and do everything we can to help the converts. And she's scrabbling among the field looking for things that fell that she can bring back to feed herself and her mother-in-law. It's sad. You can feel respect for her, respect that she's doing it in a dignified way, respect that she's being modest, respect that she's not wanting to be among the grabbing in the corners. You feel bad for her because she's going to work a whole day, and who knows if she's going to get any. I mean, she's going to get some things, but how many things did the harvesters let fall? So she's going to work all day. How much is she going to get? You feel bad for that. You feel bad that she has to gather this food. You respect her for the nobility of her choices, not telling her mother-in-law, maybe you could go to some friends, not telling her mother-in-law to come with her, not telling her mother-in-law, well, this is your hometown, the ropes, I have no clue, I can't do anything here. So you see she's a good person and a noble person and a dignified person, and you feel bad that she has to do something like this. I think most of us would feel bad for her if we knew her, if we were her friends or neighbors and saw what choice she had to make. And this was God's plot to create ultimately the scenario that Boaz is going to marry Ruth, which I think again so highlights this theme. That so often in life when we make hard choices, people looking at us making those choices could pity us, as I'm sure a lot of people pitied Ruth and Naomi at this moment, people that weren't angry at them. or scorned them, pitied them, right? What a Rahmanis, you know, two women that are used to such a rich life, and she's scrounging in the fields to find grains of barley, like the poorest of the poorest of the poor. Like, pity, Rahmanis, a nice girl. Look what God's doing to her. It was so sad. But God wasn't doing this to be harsh. Naomi said, call me Mara. Don't call me Naomi. God wasn't doing this as punishment. God was doing this to create a situation that Boaz would personally see Ruth, understand her nobility, and create the situation that the two of them would get married and produce ultimately David HaMelech and ultimately Mashiach. So I think it's an amazing, very powerful, because this is real. This really happened. And I was there. I know I feel a lot of pity for her. I feel bad for her. I feel a lot of compassion for her, how she's fallen, that she has to be doing this. I'm no princess and I work hard, but I don't have to do that. Look what she has to be doing with herself to have food. I feel so bad for her. But God, out of complete love, set this up to create the situation where Boaz would see Ruth and understand the type of person she was. So sometimes in life, God creates situations that are really harsh. But God's not harsh. God's completely loving. But he needs to create those harsh situations to propel our script forward, to create the plot lines that we need for the good he wants to give us. You know, sometimes it seems like tough love. It seems very harsh. But God's not coming from a harsh place. He wasn't coming from a harsh place having Ruth go among the gleaners of the poor. This is the way that Boaz would actually see her, and on his own see what type of person she was. So this is all part of God's script, which is a good script to ultimately produce David HaMelech, to ultimately produce Mashiach. And it's a powerful lesson for ourselves to understand in our own lives that when things are happening that seem really harsh, it's God. You know, he's good and he's running his world. And whatever's happening is a step in the storyline to put me in the situation for all the good that God wants to give me. As he wants to give her, as he wants to give us all the good. Okay, I don't know if anyone, I mean, I'm sure we've been there and done it, but I don't know if anyone would like to share anything along those lines of having experienced what seemed like God's harshness and really seen it, that it was really his love. Well, I'm sure we can all think of times because we've all been through these times. All right, so we will stop here with Ruth, and we're just going to do the next law we're up to in terms of preparing for Shabbos. And this law says that it's very important for every person to do at least something personally to prepare for Shabbos. Now, we're women. I'm sure we do loads of things to personally prepare for Shabbos. So I was actually thinking of skipping this law because, like, what am I telling you? But I said, I think the point of it is important, even though in a practical way, I don't think it's relevant. It's not like your husbands are preparing for Shabbos. You're like, I should do one thing to join you to make sure I also have a mitzvah in it. But every person should try to prepare something for Shabbos. Even if he has servants, it's considered better to do it yourself than to have someone else do it for you. Even if you're very important and you don't normally like go to the shop and purchase something or chop a salad, but you should do something for Shabbos. And most religious men take upon themselves something that they do. It might be considered, relatively speaking, small in our eyes. But I know my husband usually always likes clears the table, puts on the tablecloth, puts on the candles, puts out the candlesticks, prepares them. So it's one job amid the many, but he always does it because of this law, that he should also do something. I mean, he also does all the shopping, but we won't talk about that. But besides the shopping, he prepares the table and the candlesticks because everyone's supposed to physically do something for Shabbos. And it says in the Talmud, when it discusses this, how the greatest of the sages, not just regular people or important people or rich people, but the greatest of the sages personally made sure they did things that were, so to speak, not as per their honor, for Shabbos. One person would make sure to chop the salad for Shabbos. One person made sure to chop the wood for Shabbos. One person made sure to light the fires for Shabbos. One person made sure to clean the house for Shabbos. One person made sure to take out all the weekday utensils and bring out the Shabbos utensils. One day bring out the weekday clothing and bring out the Shabbos clothing. And the reason why they did this, though they didn't need to, and they had other people that could have done this for them, is because they personally wanted to show how important Shabbos was. They wanted to personally honor Shabbos. Just like we spoke earlier, that for the same reason, we're supposed to spend a lot of money on our Shabbos, for the same idea that we're honoring it. So every person should learn from these great sages that just as every sage had something he did to physically bring in the Shabbos, I'm sure we all do. Maybe you could share this little bit of the class with your husbands. I learned something interesting today. Something physically everyone is supposed to do to participate and give honor to the Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful week, and we should all merit to see God showering us with the good.
Thank you, Cyril. And thank you for your help with the holiday.
Amen. Thank you, Rebbitzin.
Sure. How did your house come out, Rachel?
I didn't do much. I
Thank
did
you.
5 or 6 cups of flour, but it came out not bad.
Good.
I'm
Practice
trying
makes
different.
perfect. My first house, I think you could whack someone with.
It's not the very first for me, but I am still working on the perfect recipe.
Okay. You'll get there. You'll get there. It's worth it. I remember when I was first married and I never baked challah. Why would I bake challah? It's so much work. The bakeries are very good. What do I need to bake my own for? And my husband's like, I understand you do everything in the kitchen, but the one thing you're supposed to do is make challah. I'm like, okay, I'm making challah. You want my challah, so I'll make challah. And 30 years later, they're pretty good. So, it is that very good thing for a woman to do is make challah. So just keep practicing. Take care. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.